Good evening. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, here at the Begin Center in Jerusalem, and also those of you watching on Zoom, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another of our English events here at the Begin Center. Regulars will know that we have a series of events, usually focusing on either Israeli affairs, Middle East. There's been quite a lot to talk about, obviously, in recent months, but also wider Jewish issues and matters that are, I think, pertinent for diaspora Jews and the Anglo community here in Israel. And it's a real pleasure to, perhaps a particular pleasure, actually, at these times when we're all in need of some relief, I think, from the daily news, to be able to talk about a new novel, acclaimed novel, National Jewish Book Awards finalist novel, which we'll be hearing about, and which you can, as I said before, purchase outside the auditorium afterwards. And those of you watching on Zoom, you can find it on Amazon. It's about growing up Jewish in 1970s New York. I'm not from New York, as my accent probably indicates for most of you. Neither did I grow up in the 1970s, although perhaps the behavior of my children of late has made me look like I might have been. But we have not only the author of the book, but two other fabulous speakers who can also speak to that experience personally, and a wonderful moderator as well, which we'll get to. But let me first introduce our first speaker, who is the author of the novel, Adam Amra-Hurst, Don Futterman. In addition to the book that we're going to discuss, you can also hear Don on his performance podcast, Futterman's One Man Show, where he does autobiographical monologues. Next week, he has a brand new monologue, 3 Baseball Games with Dad. For 13 years, he's been the co-host of TLV1's The Promise podcast, which I'm a regular listener to, a weekly review of politics and society in Israel. He also blogs for the Times of Israel. He's been a columnist for Haaretz and the Daily Beast. He's published 2 children's books in Hebrew, featuring his 3 actual kids, who I believe are with us. Ha'otzar Shel Yaniv, Yaniv's Treasure, and Ad Lamala, Up and Over. He's also the founding director of the Israel Center for Educational Innovation and the director of the Moria Fund in Israel. He grew up, as we will hear, in Flushing, New York, and has lived in Israel since 1994. As I said, after the program, he'll be signing books for anyone who's interested in buying a copy. And you can also learn more about Don himself and the book at his website, donfutterman.com. I'm going to welcome Don to the stage.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Florence, and everyone here at the Begin Center for making us so welcome. We appreciate your hosting this event. I also want to thank Yossi and Gil and Miriam for joining me tonight. And I know we're going to have fun, because we always have fun, and the issue will be how you can shut us up. So, and thank everyone for coming. I'm going to start the evening by reading a short section from the novel. We're going to start and end with a short section of the novel, and then at the very end we'll have Q&A after that. The novel is about a 12-year-old boy named Adam Miller. It's during his bar mitzvah year, and I'm going to read you from the 3rd chapter right now, when Adam and his best friend Jason, as you'll see, are trying to get to Hebrew school on time. They were 15 minutes late for Hebrew school. To evade their prowling principal, Mr. Biner, they used their secret entrance, a ground floor window that did not lock properly from the inside and led behind the junior congregation sanctuary stage. A passageway connected the old synagogue to the Hebrew school building next door. But today, they didn't have to jimmy the window open because it had been smashed. A baseball from kids playing in the parking lot. That's what Adam thought at first. But the windows on either side had also been broken. The boys were careful to dislodge the jagged shards still embedded in the wooden frame as they climbed through. Adam's foot landed on something, which made him topple over. When his hand hit the ground, it was cut by the glass lying on the floor. Damn! Adam wiped the blood on his shirt. He had tripped on a brick. The boys found 3 red bricks lying on the floor, surrounded by splinters and slivers of glass of various sizes. Wow, this was on purpose, Adam declared. We have to tell Mr. Biner. Biner Brain will think we broke the window to get in. Adam laughed. Jason had nicknames for everyone, and his fertile mind would generate new ones in each conversation. You go ahead, Adam suggested. Adam knew Jason was irritated by all things temple. I'll wait a couple of minutes and then I'll tell Biner I saw something suspicious. I'll meet you in class. You sure? He likes me. They all like you, Miller. Mr. Biner seemed to know about the secret entrance, which surprised Adam, and did not interrogate Adam about what he'd been doing at the rear of the old building. He surveyed the crime scene for several minutes, his face contorting as he debated what to do. At last, he handed Adam one of the bricks and sent him to show it to the rabbi. But don't say a word to anyone else, especially not the Greens. Do you understand? The Greens were the office secretaries, Mrs. Green and Miss Greenberg, devoted to the rabbi's uninterrupted tranquility. Adam had to skulk with his brick for a long time until they both looked away in tandem. Rabbi Arthur Ellenbaum was intimidating with his stentorian, scholarly way of speaking, his gaze both distant and penetrating, his thick hair with a touch of silver that glinted off his steel glasses with authority. Unlike Mr. Rockowitz, he didn't look religious except for his small knitted kippah. His private study was in the corridor of the new building, across from the glass-walled office of his gatekeepers. Adam knocked rapid fire on Rabbi Ellenbaum's oak door, hoping he wouldn't be there, that he wouldn't answer, that he wouldn't have to face him, that the secretaries wouldn't spot him. The door opened just as Miss Greenberg rose behind the glass to intercept Adam. You're holding a brick and you're covered in blood. Are you building a bookshelf or starting an insurrection? Come in, take this. He handed Adam the handkerchief from his jacket pocket. Apply continuous pressure, and after you tell me what's what, you'll go to the restroom and wash it thoroughly in the sink. Yes, sir. I'm Adam Miller. I know who you are, Adam. Your parents are old friends. They are? Adam sputtered out his report. More bad news. Rabbi Ellenbaum let out a pained sigh. Oh, let me walk you back to class. But first, the bathroom. After Adam rinsed his wound, they went to inspect the broken windows. The rabbi poked his head with care through the shattered glass, laid the brick down outside, then led Adam around to the front entrance. Let me handle this, Adam, and I'm going to have to ask you not to say anything about this to your friends. Jason was with me. We found it together. Jason? Boyer. Boyer. All right, thank you. Not a word to anyone else, though. Right. The rabbi rarely entered the old Hebrew school building, so the class was rattled when he strolled in with Adam. Where were you? Mouthed Jason, as the others snapped to attention, secreting comic books and spitballs inside their desks. The teacher, leaping out of his seat so fast, his kippah fell on the floor. He picked it up, kissed the yarmulke, decided he need not have kissed it, dropped it again, picked it up again without kissing it, and clipped it to the hairs covering his bald spot. Adam expected Rabbi Ellenbaum to explain about the broken windows, to warn them to report suspicious strangers, and he wondered if he was going to give Adam credit for reporting the incident, but he was wrong on all counts. The rabbi's news was that Mr. Rockowitz, the head of junior congregation, would be out sick for several months and could not prepare the boys for their bar mitzvahs. The new cantor would take over, training the bar mitzvah boys immediately. He would teach them to sing the Haftarah. The bar mitzvah boys were ordered to accompany Rabbi Ellenbaum around the corner to the new synagogue. Adam remembered his brother Seth's bar mitzvah as the grand event of his childhood, and he was eager to equal him. Rabbi Ellenbaum quietly asked Adam to walk with him ahead of the small pack. He looked straight ahead, but he gave Adam his charge. The bricks you found today could be nothing, vandalism most likely, but some people don't like the fact that we have taken over Parsons Boulevard with our new synagogue. It's too early to tell if these are run-of-the-mill anti-Semites or something more ominous. Please remember, don't talk about this incident to anyone but your parents. We don't want to cause a panic. Can I count on you? Adam gulped twice. There are run-of-the-mill anti-Semites in Flushing? Yes, sir. Very good. And pass the word on to your friend, Joseph. Jason Boyer? Boyer, that's right. Tell him to keep mum. I will. Good. Go back to your friends. His classmates grilled Adam for information. What'd he say? Are you in trouble? Nothing, Adam insisted. Nothing important. Rabbi Ellenbaum left the entourage on their own to wait for the cantor in the banquet hall, a refurbished all-purpose room outfitted with a soundproof folding door hidden by velvet curtains and newly installed ceiling molding and inexplicable swirling patterns designed to suggest elegance. Adam had never seen this vast, empty space naked, lit only by fluorescence, absent banquet tables, food, frills, music, or lighting. The bar mitzvah group hugged the walls and marked time making jokes quietly. Boys! A voice boomed as a bullish figure strode to the center of the room, directly under the chandelier. Why you are standing there? Chairs, now! It was him.
Thank you, Don. Okay, we're going to invite now to join Don. As I said, a couple of very special guests and a wonderful moderator with us as well. Yossi Klein Halevi, Senior Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, one of Israel's most acclaimed writers in English, the author of the New York Times bestseller Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, and co-host with Daniel Hartman and Alana Stein-Hain of the award-winning podcast from the Shalom Hartman Institute, For Heaven's Sake. He's also the author, as I'm sure many of you know, of Like Dreamers, the story of the Israeli paratroopers who reunited Jerusalem and divided a nation. Also At the Entrance to the Garden of Eden, A Jew's Search for God with Christians and Muslims in the Holy Land, and Memoirs of a Jewish Extremist. Yossi has written in the op-ed pages of multiple leading American newspapers and magazines. He's also a former contributing editor of the New Republic. Yossi was born in New York. He has a BA in Jewish Studies from Brooklyn College and MS in Journalism from Northwestern University. He moved to Israel in 1982 and lives in Jerusalem with his wife, Sarah. Yossi, please join us. And we're also very fortunate and honored to have with us Professor Gil Troy, distinguished scholar in North American history at McGill, currently living in Jerusalem, award-winning American presidential historian and leading Zionist activist. He has just released The Essential Guide to October 7th and its Aftermath, now available online. And his next book will be To Resist the Academic Intifada, Letters to My Students on Defending the Zionist Dream. Previously, he was editor of the 3-volume set Theodore Herzl's Zionist Writings, the inaugural publication of the Library of the Jewish People. He was co-author with Nathan Sharansky of Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People. He was also the editor of the best-selling instant classic, The Zionist Ideas, Visions for the Jewish Homeland, Then, Now, Tomorrow. He's an author of 11 books of American presidential history, as well as Moynihan's Moment, America's Fight Against Zionism as Racism. I'm sure you've all read him in multiple places, including in his weekly column for the Jerusalem Post and many other outlets in the United States and Israel and Canada. Giltroy. And last but by no means least, we're very fortunate to have with us Miriam Herschlag, the writer, editor, and broadcaster, opinion and blogs editor for the Times of Israel, where she oversees the largest and most diverse platform of ideas about Israel and the Jewish world. She's also the co-host of YYY, a podcast taped in the bars of Tel Aviv, where ordinary people share stories about Israel in front of a live audience, and is also a regular on the Promise podcast, where her wry observations on Israeli politics and society have delighted listeners for many years. She was raised in New Jersey, so not quite New York, but not too far. She moved to Israel after earning her bachelor's at Boston University. She was previously a radio reporter at the Voice of Israel's English service and was an anchor on Israeli television's first daily English news show during the 1991 Gulf War. Miriam Herschlag. Switch it on. No.
Hello, hello.
Does it work?
Oh, great. Grew up in New York till I was 6. Very quickly, just so we know what we have here, even though we know 90%, I think, of the people here, maybe 100. At least between us, we know everything.
You have to speak into really speak into the mic.
That was nice. Ooh, okay. Hands. The New York metropolitan area. Are you from there? Tri-state. You can also. Okay. So what's that like? Okay, and how many people here? That's place. So time-wise, how many people here remember where they were when Tricky Dick resigned? Okay, Landsman, we have a conversation to have. All right. And many of you know us all really well, but I thought we really should start, b'chol zot, by locating ourselves, and yourselves actually, in time and space at that time. So not the entire autobiography. You're a Brooklyn boy. You guys are Queens boys. I think I'm the weirdo. So we're going to start with our Brooklyn boy over here. What's just a quick kind of sketch of where you were, what kind of school you went to, what was the Jewish affiliation there, how old were you in 1970?
So first of all, Mazal Tov, Dan. It's a wonderful book, and you really have saved that period. You've brought that period back to life, and that period really is one of the most significant, I think, in the history of American Jewry, and one of the least remembered. So I'm very grateful to you just on that level. Brooklyn, and Brooklyn to Queens is like Queens to Long Island. So yes, we're BQE, we're on the BQE, but there's a difference. And even more to the point, Borough Park, which was a world unto itself. And I was a student in, if we can call it that, in BTA. I won't translate for those who don't know. Some do, apparently. And politically, I was much closer to the older brother of your main character. I was in Beitar and JDL, the Soviet Jewry movement, and very much resonating with the experience that Don writes about of walking the streets with a kippah and living in fear. And this is the early 1970s. So what goes around comes around. And so what we're living through now in some ways was prefigured by that time.
I too am so proud of you, Don. But I'm deep in my trauma zone because when you captured that stentorian voice of the rabbi, it wasn't actually our home rabbi, because Rabbi Simkus was different, but every Queens rabbi had gone to the same rabbi school and had that way of proclaiming. And so I'm still kind of working my way out of that. I grew up in Queens, so we're actually different also because my grandparents came over on the boat. And we talk about it as if there was one the boat that brought 2 million Jews from 1880 to 1920. And so I call us now the Eastern European boat people. And we were part of Generation Hope, because we knew that our lives was better than our parents' lives and was better than our grandparents' lives, and that our kids' lives would be better. And to see the despair in America today is truly heartbreaking. And my parents were not fancy pants doctors. They were school teachers, and they broke the bank to send us to Salman Schechter School of Queens, which was its own bubble. We didn't worry about being harassed by anti-Semites with kippot on our head because we had our kippot firmly in our keys. That's where it belonged. It was always in your pocket. And it's very funny because when I read your story, and it's so evocative of Queens, and it passed the Queens Boy test, because I shared it with my brothers, I shared it with Steve Greenberg, I shared it with our close Queen friends, and I said, wow, this is us. But my brothers and I had an interesting conversation because we didn't grow up with anti-Semitism. We went by bus from our very Jewish neighborhood to Salman Schechter School. And we knew there was this thing lurking outside like ghosts, but we never really had that interaction. We also didn't know what it was like to grow up with African Americans. We called them blacks then. It was just something that you read about. And so we had this very kind of bubbly experience. We also had no appreciation of how deeply Jewish New York was. Like on the one hand, yeah, we would talk about Jacob Javits. We're very proud of Jacob Javits, and Bella Abzug, who spoke Hebrew. But when I now think of all the New York media figures, Daniel Shore, Leslie Stahl, these were people who we just assumed were Americans. And we didn't realize just how deeply Jewish their story was, and in some ways their accents were. So it was in many ways, and now this is rolling to what's going on now, a feeling of a golden age. And people are now looking and wondering whether this golden age is over. So I went to Salman Schechter School of Queens and then got much more of an education. My 1 year when I was in 9th grade, and as a very twerpy, nerdy kid with heavy glasses and a big suitcase that I used for an attaché case to go to school to Bronx High School of Science, because we were afraid of the real public schools. So in 9th grade, I went every day, an hour and 3/4 to Bronx High School of Science, 1 bus and 3 trains. And that's when I encountered muggers, and that's when I was chased. And so I went to a safer school in Queens called Jamaica High School. And there you just knew that you didn't go to the bathroom. If you didn't go to the bathroom from 8 a.m. to 11:50, and it was during the fiscal crisis, so you could do that, you were okay, because the bathroom was no man's land. But they had an extra honors program, which was extraordinary. And that's when I, in some ways, entered America.
Well, so I grew up in a different bubble. I grew up in Flushing, like Adam Miller, the character in the novel. But I was a public school kid. So I had lots of not-Jewish friends. I had not-Jewish friends from my building, from Carlisle Towers. I had not-Jewish friends from school. And for me, Hebrew school was kind of this alternate universe. Hebrew school, summer camp. I went to Camp Ramah, later to Tel Yehuda from Young Judea. And there we go, right? Young Judea is what got me here today, and my wife. I think for us, it was a different set of issues because we had to appropriate our Jewish identity. We had to actively go make it. We had to create it. And we felt completely accepted, completely American. It's funny you mentioned the bathrooms, because when I got to junior high school, that's an issue in the book too. There was a bathroom controlled by what we called the hitters gang, which were mostly Italian. There was a bathroom controlled by a black gang, and there was no bathroom for the Jewish kids. So you had to take a black friend to the black bathroom, an Italian friend to the Italian bathroom, or you had to wait till they were chasing all of them out so they could clear out all the smoke because all the kids were smoking in the bathrooms. And then you'd have like 1 minute's grace where you could use the bathroom and nobody was in there. But we all adapted to that. But we felt completely part of American society. We bonded around sports. We landed on the moon in 1969. We were into science fiction. We were, looking for the future. And I told the story that on our first trip to Israel in July 1969, the pilot came on the PA system and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, an American astronaut named Neil Armstrong has just set foot on the moon." So here we were flying to Israel, landing on the moon. So I always knew my life was going to be, distant. It was going to be, aspiring to other places. But as kids, we just felt part of things. And I think what the character deals with in the book is it's the first time he ever encounters anti-Semitism. It's not like they were surrounded by anti-Semitism. There was vandalism. There was stuff we were reading about, especially happening in Brooklyn more than in Queens. But day to day, when it did pop up, it was really shocking. So that was something, and especially for him, it happens with the first time with a black kid, but then with the synagogue too. And that stuff did start to happen, and people didn't quite know what to make of it. But mostly we just felt like everything was great. We were very optimistic kids. We were very looking forward to the future and, thought we could do anything.
Yeah, I think there's something about city kids also, because I grew up to a certain point in the suburb, in Manhattan, and then moved out to the suburbs. And the thing my parents were regretting was that they were not going to necessarily raise city kids, because with that kind of independence, you guys were, on the subways, such as they were. This is a time of enormous high levels of crime. Lindsay is still the mayor. He's finishing up his long 2 terms there. But, and racial tensions are high. Not that they ever weren't high in America, but there are race riots, there are racial issues around poverty. So you mentioned that you didn't actually encounter African Americans for most of your childhood, but that's not the case with you. What was the racial experience, the racial story at that time for you?
Well, there were very few black kids in my neighborhood, but there were some. And we had some in my elementary school. And there's a character in the book is like based on a girl that I remember because the other girls didn't want to have anything to do with her. And so I usually did projects with her because I saw she was left out. And she was also really good, did really good work. So that all worked out. We all benefited. Then as I got older, I got to junior high school and also to Bronx Science. So I did stick it out for the 4 years. 3 years.
When Bronx Science was still Jewish and before it was Asian.
It was mostly Jewish and Asian already then. It was already, and it was very few African Americans or Hispanics, a few. But if you took the subway, you had to go past DeWitt Clinton High School, which had 7,600 African American and Hispanics at the other end of the street, and that's where the subway stop was. So we did that with trepidation, and you learn kind of skills to try to avoid attracting any attention. That was, I think, what we did. Except we had one friend in common, Jeff Bachner, who would try to get everybody's attention on him as much as possible, and we were always quite nervous. But he did it with humor, and we usually got away with things.
In Borough Park and in the yeshiva environment that I grew up in, we didn't divide the world racially. We divided it very simply. There were Jews and Goyim. Or another way to put it, we used to speak about there was the Jews and the world, as if the world were this extraneous place. We didn't live in the world. And it was almost as if the Jews were a separate species. And that was very much the mindset of the survivors that I grew up with. And that's what we imbibed. But, listening to all of you, and this is what I felt so strongly, Don, reading your book, is that we grew up at an extraordinary moment in Jewish history, and especially American Jewish history. And there was this convergence of really overwhelming events. First was the generation immediately after the Shoah, which we all more or less belong to. And whether you came from a survivor family or just a New York Jewish family, that was part of our experience. And you write about that very much in the book. And you ended your reading in a very tantalizing way. And by the way, I hope there's an audio version of this book, and I hope you've read the book. Is there? Not yet. All right. So the first major influence on our generation was we were the ones who had to figure this thing out. We were the ones who didn't go through it, but we experienced it almost as a contemporary event. And the second was the Six-Day War, and that totally transformed our generation and gave American Jews this tremendous jolt of self-confidence. The third was the Soviet Jewry movement, which you also touch on in the book. And the Soviet Jewry movement was really the event, or it was more than an event. It was a 25-year experience that transformed American Jewry. It gave it was the expression of the self-confidence that American Jews developed in the Six-Day War. And the final major event here, it's the 60s, or the immediate aftermath of the 60s. And we were all living in the shadow of the 60s. And I'm older than you guys. And so I experienced the 60s it was still vicarious, but I was aware in real time that this was happening. And this tremendous sense of nothing is the same anymore. Nothing's ever going to be the same. To live at a moment of such profound cultural upheaval. So you put all of these events together, and that begins to define our generation of Jews.
So it's interesting because I think we're only 5 years apart, but I think those 5 years are also significant because the 60s were really till the middle of the 70s, at least till the end of the Vietnam War. But we didn't so much see it change. It was just like always there. So we just kind of took it for granted. There were all these different ways of being in the world. There were hippies, there were non-hippies. I would hear my parents make, disparaging comments about things. When my parents would talk about anti-Semitism, I would think they were stuck in the past. It seemed like that was archaic, and they were still clinging to anxieties that we just didn't have. Now, because we didn't get to be considered for the draft for Vietnam, we didn't really have to deal with that issue so much, but my brother did because he got a number, and it was the first year.
Did you have a draft number, Yossi?
Yeah. I had a very high draft number, and so I did what good Jews in Brooklyn who had high draft numbers did. I enrolled in a fake yeshiva. The yeshiva did not exist. I never saw the inside of it. The rabbi would come to collect tuition, come to the house. And so that was my experience. It was a very uplifting spiritual experience.
I'm not going to make a political comment about how that relates to current Israel. Far from,
Go ahead.
It's funny. I have a slightly different generation. I'm feeling good, so I'm feeling young. But for me, when I think of the 1970s, I think of, first of all, that weird juxtaposition in October 1973 of the Yom Kippur War, Watergate, and Spiro Agnew's resignation, and the Mets, Buddy Harrelson, the Mets and the Reds playoff, right? And those three things, every day I was going back and forth between my Jewish identity, my American identity, because I was already kind of following presidential issues, and so I was obsessed with Watergate. I remember reading the Long Island Press and following the story there.
They had comics.
They had the best comics. And then, of course, we have to add, before that, Munich and the spate of Palestinian terrorism, which was very defining for me in terms of my Jewish identity, much more so, I think, than the Yom Kippur War and the Six-Day War. And then most powerfully, Entebbe. So when I think of the period from 72 to 76, those events, and then the bicentennial is wrapped in with Entebbe because both happened on July 4th, and I'm at Camp Tel Yehuda when it happens, we only hear about it at Havdalah. And, in Havdalah, everybody's so excited because you're trying to figure out, can you stand next to the girl with who you have a crush on? Because then you're allowed to hug and you're focusing on that. And then all of a sudden they announce that these hostages that we've been following have been freed. And the euphoria was so intense. So there are two things going on. There's a roller coaster of emotions about Israel, but there's also a flipping of the switch back and forth between America and Israel, and an American identity and a Jewish identity.
Well, it's really important what you bring up, because and I want to get back to that before time. So one of the hardest things in literature to do is to write in the absence of knowledge. Your characters don't know about 1973, right? They know about 1967 in Israel. And they just certainly don't know about this crushing. I mean, if you're young and you're watching a president fall apart, that's nothing today, but that's a very big story if you're coming of age at that time. I mean, you're a little older, and it's also, it's got to be really dramatic, because you take a certain stability in the political system for granted. So let's go back to the 70-71 specific period that we're talking about in the book and talk about what Adam Miller and his friends and we don't know, and how that made us different than, what was different about being that person that didn't know all of these things were possible.
Well, there's a real split, because all the things you just listed, happened after 71. So he didn't know any of those things were going to happen. And the Six-Day War, as you said, gave Jews the confidence to assert themselves and to be public and to be proud of being Jewish and to take pride in this tiny little country, which we knew was tiny. Like, that's the one thing we knew about it before we ever saw it. But they were this powerhouse, this little mighty army that defeated all of the Arab armies, and we heard all the stories and all the myths, and that was, gave us a lot of bravado. So we didn't know what was going to come. On the other hand, we lived through 2 assassinations, and you're old enough to really understand them. My first memory is, before that was, I'm talking about Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, but before that, one of my first memories is being with my mother crossing the street in Manhattan, and she heard that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated, and she just started to cry. And she said, "We have to go home. We have to go home. It's like things are not safe. We don't know what's going to happen next." I really didn't know if the world was going to fall apart. So we lived through those things, and we were seeing all the riots and things on television. It wasn't happening where we lived. So it was kind of a TV show, as was the Vietnam War. It was a TV show, and it was terrible. But at the same time, there was this can-do success of landing on the moon, and we can do anything, and science is going to save us, and Israel is amazing. So I think we were torn in both of those directions, and because our families, came at the turn of the century, so we missed the Holocaust. I didn't find out till fairly recently that we had relatives who died in the Holocaust, because they were never mentioned. It was never ever brought up. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It was too sad. Nobody wanted to go back there. We learned a lot about the Holocaust, but not personally. So I think that was the conflict, that things were, there was subway crime. It's in the book. There's all kinds of stuff that's starting to deteriorate in New York City. But as a kid, you just take things as they come. You don't know that they were once different or that they can be different again. You hear your parents complaining or whining or worrying about you. It's one of the most shocking things for me to realize is, my parents were more worried about me taking the subway than I am about my kids going up and down the country on their own, even though they've lived through wars and now October 7th and 6 terrorist attacks within 5 blocks of our house. And not to mention COVID. So all kinds of things that we didn't have to worry about. So there was a different level of anxiety. And of course, we didn't have cell phones. So when you were out of the house, you were out of touch. You were independent. You were on your own, and you had to figure it out. You had to figure out how to get around. Within Queens, bicycles cover the entire borough. You could, I didn't actually know that Long Island was connected to Queens. I thought it was an island somewhere out there. We didn't want anything to do with it. I actually didn't know that Brooklyn was connected to Queens. So until I started driving. So, you know, our focus was Queens, Manhattan, Queens, Manhattan. And I had grandparents in the Bronx, so, and I went to high school in the Bronx. So the Bronx is the only one that's actually connected to the mainland of the United States, by the way. But anyway, so we had things pushing in different directions. The country seemed to be falling apart and at the same time promising us everything. So it was very confusing to sort it out.
So things are in flux, obviously, and I do want to point out, obviously, that Yossi's experience and interaction with the whole story of the Holocaust is completely different, and we'll circle back to that. But I want to talk about Judaism at this time, when your experience is also going to be quite different here. And I thought it could be interesting to unpack that lovely, humorous piece that you have in the reading that you did about the kippah, because that's funny, but there's actually quite a lot in that, I think, in that story, right? I assume you think so too. You know, so if you recall, the teacher gets startled by the arrival of the rabbi into his classroom, and somehow his kippah falls off his head, picks it up, kisses it. What does he do? Throws it back down, and right. So what is happening there? What's happening in Judaism? Yossi, you have some insight on that. What's happening in Judaism that explains that moment of comedy?
So what's happening in the early 70s is it's a kind of a seam between a very insecure American Jewish community and the beginning of the emergence of American Jewish self-confidence. And the kippah is a really good metaphor for this. We were the first generation. I grew up Orthodox, and even in our community, our parents, our fathers, didn't wear kippah to work. They didn't wear kippah on the streets. Either you wore a hat or a fedora, or you went to business without your kippah. And we're the first generation that's wearing a kippah all the time, even on the subways, which was really, really dicey. And you know, Gil, when you're talking about having the kippah in the pocket, that's interesting too, because that also is a kind of escalation of Jewish identity. Because conservative Jews of the previous generation, I would guess, did not have the kippah in the pocket. And so we're wearing it. The Orthodox kids are wearing the kippah. The conservative kids have it in their pockets just in case.
If you're living in the suburbs, it's in the glove compartment.
Okay, but there's another really interesting thing that's happening with the kippah here, and that's JDL. And JDL, no matter what kind of family background you came from, if you were a teenage boy in the JDL and you were arrested, you always had a kippah available to put on. You would not get arrested without wearing a kippah. And the purpose was to show, if you would end up in a cell for a night, the purpose was to show the police, to show whoever is sharing your cell with you, that there's a new kind of Jew, that Jews are now a little bit edgy, a little dangerous. And we weren't really that edgy or dangerous, but that was what we were trying to convey. And the kippah, which when I was growing up was a symbol of an easy hit, we were trying to transform the kippah into a symbol of the tough Jew. So this is all going on in the different layers of New York Jewry.
It's actually, if you want to believe in God, anyone who grew up in a conservative synagogue and stays Jewish is proof that God exists, because there was no God. We didn't do prayer. We did like happy dappy folk songs. There was a show on stage every Shabbat morning, and the depth of the superficiality was just overwhelming. It was this thing that people were kind of continuing to do because they felt guilty, and they couldn't betray their grandparents and parents too much. And with all that said, we felt incredibly superior because we were more sophisticated than the suffocating backwards Orthodox Jews. And when we went to my cousin's Reform bar mitzvah, with the organ and the rabbi who didn't wear a kippah. And
he didn't even have it in his pocket.
He didn't even have it in his pocket, right? And the joke was that they have the conservative Jews have it in their pocket, the Reform Jews have it in the have it in the cabinet, right? Or you also say, like, what do you do with the kippah? And the Reform Jews say, what's a kippah, right? So we had all these jokes to show that we were sophisticated, that they were the goyim, they were the crazy ones, and yet our form of Judaism was so empty at its core. And yet, when you think about it, nevertheless, with all that, there still was a certain kind of gritty authenticity to being Jewish. And there was a certain kind of pride. Even when you add the crime, right? And crime was there. Crime was always hanging out. You would watch Woody Allen movies and say, oh, it's okay to be a nerd, but we were tenacious nerds. We were resilient nerds. We weren't wimpy nerds. We had a kind of...
So I think you're too harsh on conservative Judaism, which there's plenty to criticize, but there's plenty to criticize about all of them. I mean, absolutely, we were on the spectrum, and we had our friends who went to Reform synagogues who seemed to know nothing, and we have no idea what they did because they went to Hebrew school every week, but didn't seem to learn anything there. And I would say that, yes, the easiest thing to do was to imitate Orthodox practice, which I did for 12 years of my life. Okay. Looking for something more intense and something more fulfilling. But looking back now, I asked myself, okay, so what were my parents? What was the rest of the congregation getting out of it? Now we had a congregation that would sing a lot. They knew the tefillah. We had a fairly traditional tefillah, and people knew the tefillot, and they joined in, and there was, it depended which cantor we had. The cantor in this book, who's the source of inspiration for this cantor, though it's a fictionalized version, not exactly him, sang with an incredible sense of neshama. And my father, who was fairly agnostic, would come because he appreciated the chazanut and he loved the music. And he also said, he's not a frustrated opera singer. He's a chazan, and that's what I want to hear. But he would join in, and everybody joined in. And there was, I think there was a spirituality of the community, of being in the congregation and feeling part of it. And especially after we made Aliyah, and especially years after we made Aliyah, and realized, oh my God, we left our parents behind, and now they're all alone. What did we do to them? Which was not forefront in my mind when I made the decision to come here. As they aged, and I saw the community rally around to take care of them, because we were on this. My brother was here most of that time, though he went back some of those years. We were on the other side of the world, and there really was something powerful in that sense of community, which I think, yes, there was a lot of superficiality. There was a lot of kids going who were forced to, and unsuccessful Jewish education where they couldn't communicate to us what they were trying to communicate. And the love, that for sure. But there was enough, and maybe the connections to summer camp. Summer camp was always there, Camp Ramah, Young Judea camps, to save you, to do all the things that afternoon education was not succeeding at. So maybe that combination is what made it powerful for us. And Israel. And Israel was this spiritual thing for us, even if we didn't know what it was really like.
What your book does so well is really convey the warmth of a conservative synagogue, which today it's one of the things that American Jewry has lost. And in the early 70s, the conservative movement was the majority of American Jewry. We forget that. And it was so striking in your book about how the love that you feel for your synagogue. I didn't grow up feeling that way at all. And most of the kids who I grew up with just couldn't wait to get out of shul. And yet, so there was something about the conservative movement. There was a certain genius at that time where it understood the soul of American Jews, that they want to be part of America, but they're also deeply Jewish. And so that, in some ways, your book is very much about that lost era, and really what American Jewry has lost.
You talked already somewhat about Beitar, and we have the whole Young Judea thing here. So I think it's a.
Bear in mind where we're sitting, please. You know, just little respect.
And so let's talk about Jewish youth, and in particular, with the fact in mind that American Jewish kids, I know we have educators here who are working very, very hard, but American Jewish kids do not have the frameworks, as far as I know, the weekly kind of structures. They have summer camp. Summer camp is huge, and I think was important. I know for you too. I don't know if you were a summer camp guy. Oh, okay. Formative, Ramah, and then Tel Yehuda. Absolutely formative. But let's talk a little bit about both in the context also of childhood. It's not just about politics and what's happening. This is about growing up. So talk a little bit about what Young Judea or Beitar or any youth movement was at that time, and maybe, in comparison also to what now is maybe less available.
Well, look, this is where it goes to the 60s. I mean, this is where we had our expression of the counterculture, because we very proudly, at least, in Young Judea, we would trumpet the fact that it was a peer-led movement, that our madrachim, our educators, they were 20, they were 22. Looking back, they were also kids. And we were responsible for everything. We didn't have a cadre of professional educators or rabbis who were teaching us. And that was the big difference between Camp Ramah and Tel Yehuda, because Camp Ramah was the summer hangout for all the conservative rabbis, and they were teaching classes. And it was to say, it felt as stuffy, a little bit less stuffy because they were wearing shorts, but basically as stuffy as it had felt back in the Hebrew school. And, and here we were just getting these kind of inspiring, sometimes very bombastic, motivational talks and lectures about things that seem to really matter, about our lives, about Israel, about the future of the Jewish people. Like everything seemed to be at stake. And of course, your parents aren't around. It's this alternate universe without parental figures. So you're just with other teens, you're with other kids, and you don't have to make dates. You just have to find the right moment, like you said before, at Havdalah, or to walk down to the river. You're crossing the field at night, so you're exploring love and romance and sex and all the rest of that. And it's a way to do it with people. I mean, I think what's unbelievable, I look back and I look at some of my friends in the room here, the bonds we created in those experiences were so intense. They were so much more intense than daily life in school. You would be with someone for 4 weeks or 8 weeks, and you would come back feeling like this is a friend for life, and that you knew them better than the kid you've been going to school with for 10 years. So that was a place where I think where we felt like here we are also part of the counterculture, but we're creating an idealistic culture, not a nihilistic culture. Something that's going to be constructive and contribute. And we're going to come to Israel because they're all waiting for us with open arms to come help them save the country.
I just want to go back for a second. When I read Don's love for synagogue, I read it as Don's love for neighborhood. And what struck me about Queens and the Queens experience was the synagogue where it worked was not on what I would call more the Jewish religious level, but more on that level of, indeed, a community. And when you were in Hollis Hills Jewish Center, it's so interesting, you guys were Temple Gates of Prayer, so that had a certain kind of substance to your vision. We were Hollis Hills, Holliswood, Bayside. It was all about the location, right? Location, location, location. And so the Judaism was much more about kind of covered wagons circling and taking care of one another, but I thought it lacked a certain kind of spirituality and depth. Although we should also point out that it was a moment of tremendous thinking in New York. You had the greats in the Jewish Theological Seminary, Finkelstein and Gershon Cohn and Lieberman. You had Elie Wiesel. You had Yitzhak Greenberg. You had Ramosha Feinstein. You had the Lubavitch Rebbe. Things were going on in our city which were just extraordinary. But in terms of camp, in some ways, whatever critique one had of synagogue, camp was the alternate universe. It was the unkola. And there was an intensity, there was a warmth, it was outside, there was a connection to nature that was very, very powerful. And then, yeah, you always had this thing of Israel and the way Israel played this role of both being incredibly romantic and incredibly inspiring and Entebbe and all that, but also with problems that kind of invited you in to help solve. The problems didn't seem insoluble. The problems seemed things we could handle because we would sit around and in an hour-long sikha, an hour-long conversation, solve the problems. So there was this way of being very empowered. And ultimately, it was all generated not just by love and friendship, but also by ideas. The thing that I most got out of my Tel Yehud experience and my Young Judea experience was that ideas count. And we'd sit around until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, yelling and screaming about ideas, yelling and screaming about what best pula, what best educational activity would express this idea or that idea. And we also had the tremendous ability to yell and scream at one another. And that yelling and screaming showed such love and respect. And that's something, if you talk about what Adam Miller doesn't know, right? Adam Miller doesn't know that 20 and 30 years from now, there will all be these amazing technological devices. But he also doesn't know that he'll be in a world where if I dare disagree with you, we can't be friends. And I think we certainly are testament to the fact that we could disagree quite vehemently about certain political issues and still be brothers.
And it was okay to be intellectual. I mean, we were all smart, intellectual kids, and here was a place where that could be celebrated. But you could be intellectual and you could be theatrical. You could be intellectual and you could stand up in front of the group. You could be, you know, the nerd on the subway, but the star in this other universe. And, you know, that was incredibly empowering, I think for all of us. And we were searching. I mean, it was also like, it invited you to search. It invited you to say, my job isn't to just replicate my parents, it's to improve on their lives. It's to find something they don't have. I mean, I think that every generation sort of does that, you know, in their own form of rebellion. But here it was channeled, you know, towards this vision to this place. I mean, I think the comical, tragic side of it is, I think many of us imagined that living in Israel would be the same as living in summer camp. That, you know, it would be on a beautiful river with lush green mountains, and we wouldn't have to go to work. You know, and to get here and to realize, oh wait, that's not how life is organized, was something of a shock.
Oh, living in Israel is kind of like being at Camp Beitar. You know, we had rifle range and we did night maneuvers. Our counselors would wake us up at 2 in the morning to crawl on our elbows through the woods.
You think the whole world is out to get you?
You never know. You never know. But just something about the Israel experience, listening to what's being said here. The relationship to Israel was always a roller coaster, because Israel itself was a roller coaster. You know, we think of 67 to 73. We forget there was Munich in the middle of that. There was this tremendous wave of airplane hijackings. And then from 73, you go from 73 to Entebbe. So there's something schizophrenic in our relationship with Israel. These peaks and the abyss. And it didn't just begin now. We grew up with that experience.
I did want to say one thing because of who we have here, such amazing in the audience, really tremendous educators who gave everything. And so when our perception as chanichim, as kids in the movement, was that it was peer-led. But of course, Steve Copeland was writing programs to train the madrichim. There was a level
teaching us to be social critics, teaching us to be social reformers.
But it was about a story that we were telling ourselves about being peer-led, and indeed that we were. It meant that if something was supposed to be done, no one was really going to do it for you necessarily, and you could do it yourself. Lots of things that we could do ourselves. That was great. You know, this is a coming-of-age story, which is true of many wonderful books. And I notice one of the things that keeps popping up in this novel is secrets. Secrets are a really, really big part of all of childhood. They're important to relationships. You know, you tell each other secrets. But there is a moment when an adult tells you to keep a secret that I think is really, really quite dramatic, possibly traumatic as well, or possibly empowering, giving you this incredible power. And you have the moment that you read. I don't want to give anything else away, but there are other secrets in this book. And the one that you read, in which the rabbi says, don't tell anybody, except Joseph, or whatever, I can't remember his name. So I'm going to ask you, without all of this, we don't have to talk about history or anything, in your own personal stories, do you connect with that, of being the holder of a secret as part of growing up?
Well, I mean, it's in the book, so I've already thought about this a lot. I think for me, one of the things that happened that made me feel unique was that I would bond with adults. I would bond with teachers. I would bond with my madrichim. I think a lot of it had to do with my older brother. They were all like surrogate older brothers, and I was used to having this older brother in my life. And they would tell me things, and they would let me in. As a kid, especially at this age, he goes from 12 to 13 in the course of the novel. You're starting to figure out the adult world a little bit, and you're starting to figure out that you can question it, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it is. I remember one of the most, profound moments I had with another educator, Mel Reesfield, Zichrono Livracha, was I went to camp in Tel Yehuda when I was 14, and I was in his program as Ulpan for a month, and he taught us mostly a lot of Hebrew chants and songs and curses in Arabic. That's most of the Hebrew we learned. But he was very charismatic, and we put on a play in Hebrew, and I was at an advantage because I'd been to Camp Ramah, where I learned a lot of Hebrew. Because I had been used to going to camp 2 months, I came back the next summer for 2 months, and they didn't have enough programs for me to go for 2 months, so I had to do the Ulpan program again with the same guy, and I had exactly the same program. And after, in the middle of the second week, I was getting despondent because I had heard almost every line he was saying the summer before. And, he came up to me and he said, what's wrong? And I said, I don't know, last year was all amazing, but now I realize it's all just a performance. That, you're doing the same stuff you did last year. I thought last year was all just for us, and now I realize it's all for whoever's in the group. It's all the same things. And he put his arm around me and he said, this is our secret. You can't tell anybody, but you have to help me so the other kids will have a good time. And, that was an incredibly empowering moment. And then I felt like I was responsible to make sure everyone else who was there for the first time had a great summer.
He snowed you.
As the son of a Hebrew school principal who worked out on Long Island, and we knew that you could never go shopping on Shabbat on Long Island because you might bump into somebody, the secrets that we kept as conservative Jews was appearing to be more religious than we were. So we had the Shabbat dry cleaner, and you would go there in the black neighborhood. And if you did bump into a Jew there, then you were both equally problematic. And there was this weird thing, and my mother we learned also this weird butchered Yiddish. And two words she was constantly using were plotzing and pasnisht, right? And you would plotz if you were caught doing something that was pasnisht, right? And so one day I'm walking on Shabbat, I'm in my jeans. You can't wear jeans on Shabbat outside because it's pasnisht.
And you called them dungarees.
Dungarees, right? Because somebody might see you, right? And there was this whole this game of the outside inside. The rabbi would rarely, but once he's taking a walk and he comes by our house. It's on 212th, we're on 215th. And the first thing we all knew what to do is you run upstairs and you take the phone off the hook, because God forbid somebody will call while he's there, and then they'll know that the phone rings on Shabbat. And so there was this whole kind of constant, you parked 3 blocks away if you drove, except when Grandpa hit over 90, then you were allowed to drop him off right in front. And there were all these. Now, my wife Linda always goes, what kind of insane, who are you lying to? But I actually kind of liked it, because what it showed was that there was a series of rules, right? And we were constructive hypocrites. But by being constructive hypocrites, we said there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and where it lapsed. And years later, when we lived in Montreal, and I would take walks with the rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue on Shabbat afternoon, and people would drive by and go, hey, rabbi! It was like, that was pasnisht and I plotzed.
Well, Well, the rabbi was the official Jew of the community. He was, yes, he was like the high priest. He was the one who actually kept the mitzvot. And everyone else pretended to from the moment they walked in the building to the moment they left the building. You know, yes, and my parents would be very upset if the rabbi would see us driving on Shabbat. We all drove on Shabbat. I don't know that there was a single person in the synagogue besides the cantor who was as the rabbi, and you know, but they were it. And it was this strange paradox, and I think as kids, we also thought it was totally hypocritical. Like, well, why are we putting on a show for the rabbi? And the parents would just say, shh, just, you know, it was not to be discussed. You would, when you're around the rabbi, you follow the rules, and as soon as you left, you could do whatever you wanted. And that, you know, that was part of that compromise of American Jews, and that goes back to the story with the kippah you asked about before. When the Hebrew school teacher drops the kippah, he's like, he's not sure what the rules are. If the rabbi's in the room, he has to do it right. If the rabbi wasn't in the room, it wouldn't matter to him. He wouldn't care. But he's very concerned with what the rabbi thinks of you. Everyone wanted the rabbi to think you were good Jews. And then some of us actually tried to do it. And then our parents were like, wait, what are you doing? They're going, no, this is what you've been teaching us for all these years. And they're going, no, don't become an extremist. You know,
So it looked a little bit different in Brooklyn. And the secret that my friends and I carried was the Holocaust. And we were all children of survivors, and we had this contempt for American Jews. We felt that American Jews had no idea that the entire Jewish world had just been turned upside down. Now, the truth is that in the early 70s, American Jews were just beginning to unpack the secret. They were beginning to figure out that they have to say something. And of course, Elie Wiesel and the Six-Day War, I mean, these were the forces and the influences that helped American Jews find words. But it was still very new and very tentative. And for us growing up where we did, this was something that we knew intimately, and we had a language, and we grew up mimicking our parents' accents and telling their stories as kind of jokes, you know, and that's how we grew up with this deep sense of the absurdity. And American Jews were, especially, you know, the conservative movement, it was still 1950s America in the early 70s. And for us, we never experienced that, because 1950s America was whole and wholesome, and that was not at all our experience. And that's why for so many of us coming from that experience, JDL and Beitar made so much sense, because we were the outcasts of polite American Jewry. And that's where we were in some ways by birth. So, but again, it was changing. It was already changing in the Jewish community that you're writing about is already beginning to come to terms with this secret.
We've covered a lot of ground. Why don't we open up a little? Maybe people want to ask some questions, and then I hope maybe we'll hear another bit of the book from you. But let's maybe give an opportunity for our friends, many dear friends. Elon Schwartz.
So first of all, for the historical record, Brooklyn and Queens are part of Long Island. Let's start with that. Important. It's interesting, by the way, I grew up on Long Island, that is to say Nassau County. It's interesting how different the Jewish experiences were in the different counties, right? Brooklyn and Queens and Nassau, Suffolk, and Suffolk is very different than Nassau as well. So there's this movement there that cuts across them. Quickly, just a memory for my bar mitzvah, how much it's similar. I walked to shul, which I never did, and I had my kippah in my pocket, and then I decided to put it on as I was walking. And then we reached the churchyard, and the whole gang from school were hanging out at the churchyard. And I had to decide whether I was going to put the kippah back in my pocket or I was going to leave it on my head, knowing that if I left it on my head, I was going to get the shit beat out of me on Monday morning at school. And I left it on my head, and I got beat up in the bathroom. But that was so it's similar in that way, those stories. But I want to ask, the book, I think, is still a time where you are identifying with the established Jewish community, with the synagogue and with the rabbi and with all of that was there. And the rebellion takes place a little bit later.
Yeah.
And by the way, with Miriam and Don, it takes place, and you're not the only two that go through this, by leaving Ramah and going to Tel Yehuda. So I'm curious about that movement, the movement from feeling at home in the shul and feeling connected to it and feeling that. And what you don't know later is that there's going to be this rebellion that takes place from so much of it in our lives and how that happens. So I'm curious how you think about that transition that took place.
Well, okay, I'll start. I'm the author about that. So yes, I mean, I think what Young Judea allowed us to do was to rebel and to stay engaged at the same time. It was a way. Now, yeah, we were kids, so Hebrew school was just as boring to us. I mean, I was the star of Hebrew school, but that was like being Miss Subways. It was not exactly the crown you were aspiring to earn in your life. And I think Young Judea gave me a way to say, I mean, it's very funny because my brother and I grew up obviously in the same household. We both made Aliyah. We made a lot of decisions in our lives that are very similar to each other. But in my mind at the time, I was so different from him. I was in Young Judea. That was not Beitar. I was not USY. Those were his groups. I was going to make Aliyah. He hadn't thought about it yet. It gave us a framework to develop, to assert a Jewish identity that was, again, I mean, the way it played out for me was that I became more observant, and then suddenly I was as observant as the rabbi's kids. And so, where was my place in the synagogue? And, I grew up there, so I still felt at home there, but there was a real tension for me. I mean, so my rebellion was twofold. One was to join the Zionist youth movement. Another one was to become more religious than my parents. And it was like, try criticizing that, Mom and Dad. It was just, so it was, and then had my own long journey, which will be some other books. We won't talk about it now. But after that, where I ended up. But I think Ramah, as you mentioned, so right, was part of that conservative Jewish establishment, which again was, looking back, it's a small slice of the world. It's this tiny slice of the Jewish world, but that's all we knew. And then Tel Yehuda was this alternative place that was much hipper, was much cooler, was much more informal, and yet was making just as dramatic claims on your soul and your destiny, but in a different way.
I did the same thing. I only went to Ramah one summer, and I came back and insisted that I only eat kosher food in a rather unkosher home. So that was a little bit similar. And I think rebellion, it's a long runway, right? There's many steps along the way, and it starts before adolescence. You're just more dangerous when you can, drive, right? You can do more amazing things. But maybe if anyone wants to maybe ask another question.
Hi, I'm Lee. I represent another county, Manhattan, and another youth movement. There's at least one other person who grew up in that group, Hashomer Hatzair. Don, the way you described sort of anti-Semitism being there but not being in your face, if I can paraphrase what I heard you saying before, wasn't the way I experienced how Adam Miller interfaces with anti-Semitism, especially without giving any spoilers, in the way you choose to end this novel, which for me was very powerful, the choice of how the final bar mitzvah situation is impacted by external events. And again, dancing around spoilers, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that choice as a writer to have anti-Semitism play the role in the book as it does.
Well, it's there. I mean, at the time, there was a level of anxiety, certainly in our parents' generation. I don't think they were free of it. But there was a tension in my family, and there's a tension in the novel, between my brother and Beitar, who thought, Jews were under attack and under assault, and we needed to form self-defense organizations and go out. And, it was usually worrying about Haredim in Brooklyn being attacked by African Americans or other neighbors who were hostile. And my father, who was saying, anti-Semitism in America exists, but it's a marginal phenomenon. Don't blow it up. I mean, this is the golden age. He didn't use those terms, but American Jews are more at home here than they've been in any society in our history. We're still have to watch it. My parents were very concerned that we never misbehave in public, partly middle-class propriety, but partly because we had to be aware that if we were ever seen doing something wrong, we'd be identified as Jews and we would feed the anti-Semitic undertow. So that message we were taught explicitly. It wasn't hinted. It was told. We didn't say Hashan Difna Goyim because my mother didn't speak Yiddish, but that was the sense that you had to be on your best behavior when you were out in public, which is another reason why Young Geneva was so great, because we didn't have to be on our best behavior. We could do anything we wanted. But I think, in also trying to write the book in a way that would speak to the present reality of American Jews. And again, I was writing this before the past year, so I was thinking of the attack on Squirrel Hill and other violent anti-Semitic incidents. And again, it's the same tension. Yes, previous presidential administration kind of let the anti-Semites out of the woodwork and gave them legitimacy in a way I think they hadn't had in a long, long time. And there was this most horrific, lethal attack on a synagogue, the worst in American Jewish history to date. And at the same time, there was, and many more incidents of anti-Semitism, and at the same time, American Jews fully integrated into the highest echelons of American society, even to American power, even in government, things that my parents couldn't have dreamt of, in their era when they were growing up. So I think there's that tension, and I think right now the question is even more acute in the light of what's the response has been to October 7th and the war with Hamas. I mean, it's a complicated issue to get into at this moment, but I think that was one of the reasons I wanted to highlight that in the book, was because I thought it would have something to say about what's happening today, and show that the tensions were already there then about, do we have to take this as the most imminent threat facing our community, or are we actually blowing it out of proportion and perhaps making it worse than it is? And I think that, that those are questions that are being asked right now.
So Don, I think if you count it up now, you've spent the majority of your years in Israel. Your life had a particular trajectory. And I'm wondering if you had gone a different route and were still a director of alternative theater in the Bay Area, and you had written this book, how would it be different? Would you have been more forgiving to the American Jewish community, maybe more critical? Would you have wanted to write this book? How did your Israeli Zionist realization inform Adam Unhurt?
No, that's a good question. And talk about what I don't know. I mean, one of the motivations for writing the book for me was to show what my childhood was like then at that time. I mean, it's corresponds to my own growing up, and certainly there's autobiographical elements in some of the incidents that are in the book. I mean, I think the character, one little spoiler in the novel, is asked at some point to start a Jewish heritage society in his school. Now, he does something that's very publicly Jewish in his school. So it's not that he's hiding his Jewishness. He's already out there in his public school, public junior high school is Jewish. But he's torn because his closest friends at that point are not Jewish. And he's can't figure out what he's supposed to do about it, because if he starts a club, he's starting a club that his closest friends, they could join in theory. Non-Jewish kids could come to the Jewish Heritage Society, but they wouldn't, and it would be an act of exclusion. And I think that's a tension that you face in America that you don't face here. We don't have to deal with that here. Another motivation was for my kids. I started thinking about this book and even writing some of the first things that ended up in the book later in a different form. When my sons were approaching their bar mitzvah, they're sitting in the front row. You can see it was a long time ago. I was thinking of what they were dealing with as kids growing up in Israel and how incredibly different it was for them. In some ways, much more immediate threats to all of our survival that we didn't even ever think about. We were, Vietnam was happening on the other side of the world. We didn't feel in danger unless we got drafted. But on the other hand, we had to navigate this, intricate network of relationships and groups and people, and the Jewish friends and the non-Jewish friends, and the in-group and the out-group. And again, we weren't the only ones with secret identities. Most of my Italian friends went to Catholic school after public school, but like one day a week, it was much less of a commitment, much less interfered with their social life. And my Japanese friend went to Japanese school to learn Japanese. So, it wasn't like they didn't have other identities, but that was not the focus of our experience together. A bar mitzvah is this one unique moment when all those non-Jewish friends are invited inside the Jewish house, inside, and to see you behaving differently than they ever get to see you. Your Jewish friends had their own version of the same experience, but your non-Jewish friends are coming in and they're like, Martians. And we had our religious guys standing by the door who plopped yarmulkes, those nylon yarmulkes that fly away, on top of every one of the boys' heads as they came in. But we had mixed seating, we're all together. But that was a chance for them to see this other world that we lived all the time that they didn't really know anything about. And occasionally they would get curious, like, what the hell are you guys doing there? Like, what is that all about?
I think maybe, would you like to read another excerpt?
Sure. I'm going to read you a short, actually most of chapter 6. Adam's brother offered subway counsel. You do not ever enter an empty subway car. You go to the 2 cars in the middle. Those are the conductor's cars, but the conductors are not always in them. If there's no conductor, you go to the most crowded car you can find. Seth was 5 years older than Adam, had transferred to Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan before the summer, commuted by subway, had girlfriends, and lived much of his life beyond their parents' surveillance. They shared a room, and Seth dictated the rules. Never, ever, under any circumstances, make eye contact with anyone on the subway. Not even on the platform, especially not on the platform. Between the pervs and the muggers, you're asking for trouble. When you're getting off the train, you position yourself next to the door and you don't get off the train until the very last second. How do I know when's the very last second? Stand clear of the closing door. When you hear that, that's when you jump off the train. You know why? If I wait any longer, I won't be able to get off. No! Genius. If a mugger has picked you out, he won't have time to follow you. Seth went back to his book. But why did that kid keep saying Jew ball bastard over and over? like a song stuck in his head. Jubal bastard, Jubal bastard. Maybe he was crazy. Adam's stomach clenched. His scalp itched. He wanted to rip that sound out of his skull. No, I mean, why would a black kid say something like that? Jews and blacks are on the same side. We're on their side. They're not on our side. Seth always had things all figured out. No room for dispute, with confidence and turn of phrase Adam profoundly envied. Anyway, Seth summed up, a lot of them hate us. Connie doesn't hate us. She's our maid. Mom doesn't like that word. She's our cleaning lady. Her daughter doesn't hate us. We sent Ellie to college. We did? Dad didn't want her. Dad wanted to give her an equal opportunity since Connie couldn't afford it. Adam thought about this. Wasn't that a good thing? Ellie wrote to Mom, returning half the tuition, saying she didn't want to be in debt to the white man who oppressed her people. I guess it's okay to be half oppressed. Maybe she didn't have the money anymore. Mom cried. She was so upset. Adam pictured his mother crying, which made him choke up. Gracie doesn't hate me, and neither does Kevin. Who the hell are Gracie and Kevin? Kids in my class. Not talking about them, Nimbus brain. I mean the Black Power types, the Black Panthers, the Afro-American Student Association. Why would they hate us? I don't know. We live in nicer houses. Nicer houses? That couldn't be it. And Adam had never lived in a nicer house than his black friends. Well, until now. Seth sighed in mock exasperation, secretly relieved to be liberated from the 19th century Zionist tractate he'd been attempting to read. I'll show you something. Seth unlocked the black steamer trunk in which he kept his life. Adam peeked over Seth's shoulder to get a glimpse of Seth's treasures, but he only spotted a Playboy stashed under piles of pamphlets. Seth dove into the clutter and pulled out a Converse All-Star shoebox. Your sneakers? Wait, idiot, Seth snapped, tilting the box in Adam's direction. Ever hear of Julius Lester? No response. When Mom says his name, she spits 3 times. Julius Lester? That's what she's saying? I thought it was something in Yiddish. Mom doesn't speak Yiddish. She's always telling me to stop hawking her china, because you're a pest. Here, read. Adam looked where Seth was pointing. It looks like a poem. A black teacher, read this masterpiece written by one of his students on Julius Lester's show. Adam read the poem. Hey, Jew boy, with that yarmulke on your head, you pale-faced Jew boy, I wish you were dead. That was allowed on the radio? You ever hear of free speech? Adam gulped. But before he could form words, Seth read more. Then you came to America, land of the free, and took over the school system to perpetrate white supremacy. Doesn't really rhyme. That's not the point. We're Jewish, not white. And there's lots of Jewish teachers like Mom and Dad. Yes, like Mom and Dad. Because those were the best jobs people like Dad could get with a GI Bill. What's a GI Bill? That doesn't matter. One of the parents on Julius Lester said, Hitler didn't make enough lampshades out of them. That's a quote. You know how many Jews who live in New York went through the camps? Adam felt his blood vessels contract, his muscles vibrate. He'd had nightmares ever since he'd seen the documentary Night and Fog at summer camp. Dead, naked Jews stacked higher than a building. Every night, Adam offered God his life in exchange for the $6 million. One jump in time is all it would take. But his bargaining had produced no results. You know what pisses me off? Seth pondered aloud, instructing his younger brother as usual. I got in all that trouble taking over the principal's office, and I was protesting that 6 black students had been murdered in Georgia. What was the principal supposed to do about it? That's not the point, Jesus! It was easy for Adam to get Seth mad, but calming him down was also simple. See, you're just like Mom. You did what you thought was right, and it was right. That's true, too. It's complicated. You know, they wanted to get rid of the Jewish principals in schools in black neighborhoods. That's what caused the teacher strike. But everyone wanted Dad to be the principal because they knew Dad really cared, that Dad's the best principal you're going to find. Well, he was the best principal. Now leave me alone, I got to read. Seth's patience with his younger brother could dry up in an instant. Adam didn't quite grasp the politics of his father's career, but he knew Connie said she loved the boys like her own children. Gracie had liked him since 4th grade, had been his partner on school projects, or really, he had volunteered to be her partner when no one else would. Jubal was the only person who had ever said anything disparaging to Adam about his being Jewish. Was it possible that black people secretly hated Jews? Adam always believed Seth, but this time he wasn't sure.
That's great. And just to say, in case Julius Lester became Jewish. Okay, just need to add that in. But that happened in 10 years later.
Okay, well, firstly, I want to thank our speakers very, very much. I want to thank Miriam Herschlag, Gil Troy, Yossi Klein Levy, and of course, Don Futterman, whose book you can purchase outside. I'm going to ask Don actually to leave the stage now ahead of the audience so that he can be ready for you to receive your books to sign, as you don't all sort of ambush him as he leaves. Unfortunately, I don't think he's available for hire to read the book when you buy it, which maybe you would like him to do so after hearing him tonight. But thank you all for coming. It's been a really wonderful event. Thank everyone again, and we have another event here on Monday, which you can check up on our website and our Facebook page, and hope to see you then. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
My parents would say refuge, but there was something weird going on in the family, and this in cancer. That's what
Rachel Nine. You gotta know Rachel Nine. So one of our